Okay, it's the top of the hour. Look, I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar today. Thank you very much for joining us. This is OnePoint in conjunction with SWOOP. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Luke Grange. I head up the collective intelligence and design thinking part of OnePoint, which is a transformation consultancy and an advisory company. We're head officed in France, in Paris, and have been around for a number of years, and recently moved into the Asia Pacific region with offices in Melbourne, Sydney, and in Singapore. Some of my colleagues are joining us on the call. I can see you popping up there, Julie, Pauline, Alice. Alice will be supporting us from a technology perspective because during the webinar today, we're going to have some wonderful activities that I think you'll all enjoy doing. And I'll take you through how we'll get onto that and start to do those activities as we move through the presentation today. But I just wanted to hand over to Cai and Emily from SWOOP to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the presentation itself.
Thank you very much, Luke. My name is Cai, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of SWOOP Analytics. And I'll let Emily introduce herself momentarily. SWOOP is a analytics platform, and we analyze how people interact with each other on Microsoft Teams, Yammer, and Workplace by Facebook. And some of the things we're going to be sharing with you today is about some results from the biggest benchmark study that we know has ever been done of Microsoft Teams. So we are very much a data-driven, but people with a heart, because we care about how people actually interact and collaborate with each other. And we help organizations become, again, faster and more efficient at collaborating. Emily.
Thank you. So my name's Emily, and I am SWOOP's Director of Customer Success for the APAC region. So I assist all of our wonderful SWOOP customers, and I'm sure we've got a few on the call today, just with helping them get the most out of the analytics that are available in their SWOOP dashboard. And as Cai mentioned, today we'll be covering some of the findings that we've discovered in our most recent Microsoft Teams benchmarking report, and I'll also have the opportunity to share with you some of the worst practices that we identified as a part of that study, as well as some more actionable tips and tricks that you might be able to implement while in your work from home setup.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Cai. Cai, I do like your background. It does show that you're in Sydney. We're a very sort of multinational webinar today, showing the backgrounds that you can actually put into Teams, because I actually don't think that that's the window behind you in reality, is it? I love it. So kicking off, and I'm just going to wait a couple more seconds for people to join, because if they miss out on this part, then it's going to be a bit trickier. Thanks very much, Alice, who's going to be in our chat window helping with any of the technical issues. So if once we get into the technology, you have any questions, please pop those into the Teams chat window, and Alice will attend to those. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, also put those into the chat window, and we'll try and get to those as we progress through the session itself. So we have shared a screen with you there where you see working remotely, 40 minutes, SWOOP, OnePoint. What I'd like you to do is, if you do have a computer with you, please do go into a web browser and go to Klaxoon.com. Klaxoon with 2 O's there. Klaxoon with 2 O's. I know it's been spelled with, yeah. Thanks, Emily, for putting that right. Once you get into Klaxoon.com, there's an area for you to put an access code in, and the access code is on the shared screen here. We'll also, Emily, you've already popped that into the chat window. Thank you for doing that. If you can put that code in there and then progress to the next screen. You can use a mobile phone to do this, but it does work slightly better if we do have a browser window. Thanks for joining us, Scott. We're just saying that if you can go into a web browser and go to a website, klaxoon.com, and we're using this technology. OnePoint is a French company. We happen to be using a French derived technology here, klaxoon.com, to do our activities today. So once you've put that code in, HRKPTMS, then we'll move to the next part of the session. Then just put your access code in, press on the blue go button, put your name in there. Click join. And you'll see the same picture with the cat and the laptop that you've got on your shared window. Now, what's just happened is if on your browser, a slides appeared on the left-hand side, which says work remotely and achieve more together with your colleagues. That's what should have happened. Your browser window is split in two. On the left-hand side of the browser, you'll have the slides that we're going to be presenting. And on the right-hand side, there's a thread of all the activities that we're doing. So right now, it looks like you've got a slide on the left-hand side and a slide on the right-hand side. Now we're going to be jumping into this, and the topic of the conversation throughout the webinar is going to be about working remotely, particularly during the COVID-19 situation, where a number of us have been relegated to work from home and are finding that slightly challenging, and particularly around using Microsoft Teams to get work done. And SWOOP has done a huge amount of research around that. What I'm going to do is I'm immediately going to kick off with an activity. So on the right-hand side of your screen, a pink bar would have come up, which says, what does working from home evoke in you? What feelings? I'd like you to use your mouse and click on that, what does working from home evoke in you? And where it says idea, I'd like you to write one-word answers for this. So you can have a number of shots at doing this, but just write one-word answers for how it's making you feel, and then click on the pink post button. Immediately on the shared window, we see things are appearing of flexibility, confusion, isolation, and that certainly is the case. A number of people feeling very isolated, and that's where these tools that help us collaborate are most useful. That's a great word cloud. Flexibility appearing to be the biggest word there, which is great because I think a lot of us were looking for flexibility in our work environments anyway, just before the situation. Cat, no dog. No dogs appearing. Agility. Chairs. Fantastic. For anybody who's just joined the conversation, please have a look at the Teams chat window to see what we're busy doing here and how to get involved in this activity. Chocolate. A lot of people baking as well. Nice. Okay, we'll shut this activity down. I'm going to send a snapshot of that across to our meeting, and we'll move on to the next part. So what you'll see is that slide should reappear on the left-hand side, working remotely. And a new slide, the reality of working from home, will appear. And this certainly is something that hits home, going to the office and collecting your technology from the office, your laptops, your spare screens, and bringing those home. I wouldn't mind even if people answered the following question in the chat window: is what did you leave at work that you wish you had brought home? Be interested to know what those what that is. I know there are a few things. Clement, who's one of our business development executives, went back to the office recently to collect a chair because his chair at home wasn't comfortable enough. Clement, I know you're on this call, and I think that's something that, yeah, there we go, has helped you with your back pain that you were having. And what our companies and organizations have been also trying to do is provide us with the tools, the online tools, to be able to work from home most effectively. We've had to set up home offices in our bedrooms, in our lounges, in our dining rooms. And that hasn't always been easy. I find it really useful to move around the house and to move my office around. It gives a little bit of, I guess, light in my day, where I can sometimes even sit outside, except for today in Melbourne. It looks nice where you are, Cai, but it's raining here in Melbourne. And also managing how work gets done, particularly for those managers out there that need to understand what their teams are doing. It's been quite challenging to understand, how to get work done and how to see that work being done, and also trying to get into a rhythm of working. It's so important to try and keep those routines going, that getting up early and making sure that we don't spend the whole day in our pajamas. Trying to bring a professional element into our work on those conference calls can also be a bit challenging. And I do have another activity. It's another word cloud that we're going to do. So a pink bar should have appeared on the right hand side of your browser window. If you click on that, what I'd like to know is what online digital tools were you provided with to work from home by your organization. So once again, one word answers. Let's get that word cloud up on the shared screen so you can see that. If you click on where it says idea and write something in there, and then click the pink word post, do a few of those. Let us know what different tools you were provided with. So it looks like Teams is standing out there, so that's good. We've got the right people on the call, but this call definitely is not only for people using Teams, people using Zoom, people using Skype, Cisco, Citrix, Microsoft Office 365. Haven't seen, yep, there we go, Yammer's up. Yammer's up and running. That's good, because we're going to be talking about using Teams in conjunction with Yammer during our call here, and we've got some great ones there. Email happens to appear there, the weak link. Nice. That's a great word cloud. Thank you everybody for participating in there. I'm going to take a snapshot of that one. That'll go into our meeting. I'm going to close this activity down, and we'll go back to the presentation. So as you can see in Klaxoon on the right-hand side of your screen, we're capturing what's going on during this session. We're going to be able to share that with you. The session is also being recorded, I believe, Emily, and we'll also be able to share that with you. And the slide on the left-hand side of your screen should be changing now. And I'd like to hand over to Swoop to take over on this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luke. So as we mentioned earlier, SWOOP has conducted the world's first and the world's largest benchmarking study of Microsoft Teams. And as a part of this study, we also chatted to a lot of experts in the field and lots of consultants, so we could come up with some of the emerging worst practices, which might seem a little bit negative, but you'll find that these sorts of insights are really informative. So we benchmarked over 5,300 teams across 15 organizations and over 47,000 active members, and this is what we kind of came up with across the board as some of the worst practices. And as I go through some of these, we'll get to reflect on this a little bit afterwards in an activity. I want you to think about some of the points here that might resonate with your experiences in your organization when it comes to the deployment and rollout of teams. So the first point that I have here is around over-formalizing and over-structuring the team's rollout. And when we talk about this, this is what I mean doing those incremental department by department rollouts. You know, all staff have to be formally trained before they're even being given access to the tool. There's approval walls and all those sorts of things. And of course, the result of this is that employees kind of have no room for exploration or experimenting with the way that they want to structure their team sites. And of course, in the end, you'll probably end up feeling quite overwhelmed and confused, and your workload might actually increase because you've just been thrown in with another tool and you're not really sure what you're using it for. But instead, we find that it's more important for people to become comfortable with the tool in their own time, and to have it slowly rolled out. You know, people kind of can become familiarized with it for their day-to-day work, and then they can eventually shift into Teams as being their core working hub. The second point that I have here is around allowing the IT department to dictate how to use Teams. And I'm sure this is probably one that you might have experienced before. But what we found by talking to a lot of the experts as a part of this study is that a lot of the more successful rollouts that we saw of Teams was when the IT department worked a lot more collaboratively with other parts of the business. So they might have been working with learning and development or HR, and really looking at it from the employee's point of view, which we find is a lot more successful. And we also found that sometimes IT will just completely switch off some of the tools that you have available in Teams. They might turn off, you know, being able to turn on your video, or they might completely turn off things like chat. And they don't really give any reason around as to why they're doing that. And we also have found that sometimes that's so that they can reduce the number of support requests that they have coming through. The next point we have is around replicating the status quo in Teams. And by this, I mean people are transferring everything and the way that they would normally work, those typical formal organizational hierarchies and structures. They're just replicating that exactly the way that they used to work and just applying that to the Microsoft Teams context. But we think that organizations should be really using Teams as an opportunity to improve the way that they work, and to get rid of some of those bad behaviors that maybe you were guilty of before. And of course, we would recommend that you would never use something like an email distribution list to create new teams on Teams. Then moving on to the next point around relying on senior executives to drive this change. Just to give you a bit of a picture of what this could look like, imagine if you invited your CEO and your COO all into every single team that's available in the network, just for the purpose of, you know, showing that they, you know, have that level of visibility. Of course, they wouldn't be able to deal with all of the excess notifications. You know, they don't really have the key purpose for being a part of that team. But rather, we would recommend that it's important to have more of your operational leaders to be a part of these teams to model those core behaviors. So these are more like the direct leaders, line managers, team managers, those sorts of people who should be driving this change. When you look at the analytics side of things, that's why if you do have access to a SWOOP dashboard, on the personal tab, well, that's where we'll always start. We're always looking at the individual level, and, you know, having that grassroots approach we find for Microsoft Teams is a lot more effective in driving increased collaboration on Microsoft Teams. And the final point that I have here is around using Teams as an alternative to Yammer, SharePoint, OneNote. And I'm sure you've had these conversations internally around, oh, well, we've got Microsoft Teams now and we don't need Yammer. We don't need to use SharePoint. Or people sometimes struggle to find the purpose for each of these tools. And you'd be surprised to hear about how many organizations think that there is no need for these tools now that Teams is around. But to be clear, Teams is the place for day-to-day work. And ideally, we would like to see activity in Teams or your team size to be no more than 10. And later on in today's session, we'll also talk to a very specific best practice team example from one of the organizations that SWOOP is working with. So now that I've given you that overview of all of these emerging worst practices, I want you to take the opportunity to reflect. So Luke, I'm not sure if you're ready to
Yeah,
launch.
I'm all ready. Thank
activity.
you so much for those insights and sharing those with us. There's some great ones there. So your screen in your browser window should have popped up with Teams worst practices. If you click on the blue bar that says participate, you'll be presented with a number of multiple choices there. So regarding Microsoft Teams deployment, which of these emerging worst practices that Emily was covering off there, do you think your organization is guilty of? So have a look at those and select those that you feel answers that question. You can choose more than one, and let's see what transpires. We'll have a look at the shared window soon. Once you've done that, submit your answer. Give it another few seconds. A lot of people putting their answers in there. That's great. Now let's have a little look-see and see what we came up with there. So, 2 on 38%. That's interesting, isn't it? Emily, do you want to have a talk to those?
It's actually quite an even split. I thought some of these might have stood out a little bit more than others, but it looks like the over-formalizing and over-structuring and allowing the IT department to dictate, those ones seem to resonate most. So it's just, I think it's also interesting just to reflect on how these things are operating in your organization and maybe how you can help to lead the change moving forward.
Yeah, definitely that last one, that use Teams as an alternative to Yammer, SharePoint, and OneNote. There's obviously some confusion as to which tool when, which is coming through. And I'd encourage your organization and your groups and departments to talk about that now, because it's such an important thing to be getting work done in the right channels. Fantastic. I'm going to close down that activity and we're going to move on to the next slide. So, let's have a look there. Super. So you should have been brought back to the slides, and we'll move to the next slide there. So how to work effectively as a team in Microsoft Teams should have appeared on your browser window. And I'll hand over back to you guys.
Yes, thank you. So, of course, we didn't want to keep it too negative by looking at the worst practices. So we thought we'd also pull together some of those top tips that you can even action at the individual level for working more effectively, especially during these times when we're feeling maybe a little bit more disconnected. But with these tools, those connections can still definitely exist in these platforms. So the first one I've got here is around only inviting the team members who would typically interact with each other on a daily basis. And that's about inviting team members into a team. So I spoke very briefly before about having the ideal team size to be less than 10 members. So I'm just making an assumption here that maybe you could be a member of teams that are significantly larger than that, and maybe to think about the spread of activities in those teams. Are there hundreds of people in this team? Are hundreds of people actually contributing? Do they all necessarily need to be there? And if there's no real reason for them to be there and there's no key purpose for those individuals, then simply do not invite them. And I'm sure they'll definitely appreciate not getting the endless notifications and being mentioned, their channel or the team being mentioned all the time as well. So really think about the purpose of each team member within the team. The next point we have is around using channels in your team to broadly categorize conversations, but don't go overboard. So just as a very top level recommendations, we would aim for a maximum of 4 channels in each team. And through our benchmarking, I think we found that I don't think there was no team that had more than 20 channels. So unless you have a really special situation, we would suggest keeping the channels to a minimum, or else you'll end up with a heap of random ghost channels, and it will make people probably feel a lot more inactive than what they actually are. The next point we have is around post frequently in Teams, and I'm talking about in channels, not necessarily in chat. So if you're aiming for that 1 to 2 channel messages a day, then that would be a fantastic starting point. As a part of the benchmarking, our best performing team, we had every single member were posting up to 14 messages a day on average, which is really fantastic to see. The fourth point we have is around actively gathering intelligence on what others are working on and on which might impact your team. So this is around your average membership in Teams as well. So people are a member of, on average, 3 teams, which we found through our benchmarking, but they're actually only mostly active in one of those teams. And we also found that 83% of teams are private as well. So with Teams, you need to make more of a deliberate effort to reach out and to report back to the team. And this kind of also ties in nicely with the whole what tool when, and, you know, what are you using Yammer for versus what are you using Teams for? Later on, we kind of make a nice analogy around Yammer being more like the virtual water cooler, and then Teams is for teamwork. And then the last point we have is around making the most make the most relevant and most frequently accessed file available directly in your team. So of course, you're also able to add tabs in Microsoft Teams just for easy access to files. So if you're looking at Excel, for example, instead of clicking through multiple times, you know, browsing for your file, opening it up, opening the wrong file, going back and looking for the right file, you can also tag those. You can also tag that potentially in Teams as well, which is something that we would recommend. So that's all of those tips there. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Emily. Next slide, the value maturity model. This is something developed by Simon Terry, who is a global thought leader in the world of collaborative productivity and the tools that we're discussing today. And what Simon came up with was this continuum where he felt that all organizations were at certain stages of their maturity of putting these types of tools like Teams and Yammer and SharePoint and Zoom and all those kinds of tools in place to actually get work done. And he starts off with the more, I guess, immature organization that's trying to grapple with this, that is trying to connect, is trying to allow people in the organization to connect using these tools. It's an incredibly important part of using these tools. It's where we might introduce somebody to somebody else through the tool, saying, you know, James Weatherby, I think you would really benefit from being connected to Arthur Chamberlain around a particular topic because he's actually shared some of his insights somewhere else. Why don't you guys get connected? And as a result, something gets done. There's something gets ignited in the network, and work gets done, and there's value achieved. But this is part of the immature sort of side of the value maturity model. And then we move up to sharing. This is where we've got work that's been done, that's been created, and we share that with other people in the network, and they get value from that. And as we start to mature more, we start to actually solve problems within the tools. So inside of the tools, we actually start to get problems solved and identify problems. And there's quite a big difference between sharing and solving. Simon Terry goes into this in detail in his blog posts, but there's the watershed moment where you start to get stuff shared after solved after sharing it, and he refers to this as working out loud. The mechanism he uses to start to solve stuff is where you put your work out there before it's completed, and people chime in and start to add value to your work. It takes an element of vulnerability to do that. And obviously at the top of this chain, there is innovation, and we'll have pockets of innovation across organizations where innovation is being done inside of our productivity tools online. And that is definitely something that's incredibly valuable. But I think what Simon was alluding to with this continuum is that you can't go straight from an organization that's connecting to an organization that is flat out innovating. You need to go through the process to actually get there. So connect, share, solve, and innovate. We've actually got an activity lined up for you right now, which is if you have a look at these, connect, share, solve, and innovate, what order do you feel that they are in your organization right now? So your screen, your browser should have just put up the words value maturity model. And if you click on the blue bar, which says participate, and click on there, you'll get each of these: innovation, sharing, connecting, solving. What I'd like you to do is use your mouse and drag those up and down, depending on the order you feel that they should be in, with the most dominant one at the top. So what you feel you're actually doing right now at the top, and that one which you feel is sort of least being done in your organization at the bottom. So we'll give you a little bit of time to order those, dragging them up and down to the degree that you feel they make the most sense. Let us know if you've got any technical difficulties in the chat window in Teams, but it should be working for you where you can drag those up and down. I'd be interested to know what that comes up with. I know Swoop's done quite a lot of work with Simon Terry over the years, as well as myself. I know I have as well. He is an expert, and this is a great model to take back into your organization with you. Once you've ordered that effectively, then click on the submit button. Let's give you a little bit more time. Let's see who's been adding. Oh, we've got most people have been doing it. That's great. Okay. So let's see what came up with. Okay, you came up with connecting at the top, sharing, solving, and innovating, which makes a lot of sense, because I think having so many people all working at home right now, organizations that obviously were meeting face to face and relied on that, which is obviously something that was really important to us when we were in the office, are now heading into this journey on this continuum. Emily, Cai, did you want to add anything to that?
No, it's. I think you're spot on. It's that we got to get used to working in this environment, and I think the order reflects that.
Great. Thanks for your participation in that. I'm going to close this activity down, and once again, the left-hand side of your screen should now reflect the slide, and I'll just move into the next slide there.
Yeah, you can probably even fast forward to the next one, actually, because we've already talked about the benchmarking study. I just wanted to, Teams, I guess, and what we're all doing now with working from home, it is actually about getting work done. So when we looked at those 5,300 teams, we were keen to find out how Microsoft Teams is actually being used for getting work done. So we have analyzed how everyone were working together in the teams. And then we applied some statistical cluster analysis to find out what are the typical sort of buckets of way that people interact. And there were actually five very typical dominant patterns that came out. The last proportion is if you look at the pie chart, the 61% are teams that have been set up probably just for trial and error. You had one person going in and then just testing it out. So most teams of the 5,300 were actually really not being used much. And we are sort of we think that's because people are just playing around, which is good. The other roughly 40% were split up to 4 distinctly different types of teams. The single leader team, you have one person. Think about the project manager sort of calling the shots and everyone interacting with the project manager. The self-directed team is, from all the research that have been done by, I guess, the thought leaders in this field, people like Richard Hackman, Sandy Penland, and Amy Edmondson from Harvard. They all point to a self-directed team as probably being the most sort of desirable one, where everyone is pulling together, and there's a greater level of, I guess, of people all sort of being codependent on each other and working together. The other two different clusters we found were probably things you'd say, well, should that really be in Teams or not? But it shows that Teams is being used for more than teamwork. and that's forums and communities of practice. So two very different types, where you can argue a forum could maybe be more like a business unit where you got the general manager sort of updating the teams or their colleagues about what they're doing. And the communities is, well, what we would normally think. We can even think about us here in the call as a community of people that are interested in a particular topic. What's interesting now is that we've actually seen during March that there was a 210% increase in the use of Microsoft Teams. So these patterns, as we all, I guess, adjusting to working from home, becomes even more important for us to find out what team type are we actually. So if you think about your own team, even before COVID-19 and after, has those dynamics changed for you? So that takes us into the next little exercise. We'd like to have to think about, if you think about those 4 team types, what were you as you were working in the office, in your team that you're in at the moment? What did that look like? Would you consider yourself to be a single leader? So there was like one sort of more person in the office that was driving most of the interactions and conversations in the team? Where you feel like you're a self-directed team? Were you more like a forum where, there are lots of people that are sort of just, listening in, but it's really done by a few people sort of at the top? Or were you more like a community? So
now that you've considered that, thanks, Cai, I'll just hand over to the audience. A big pink square's just opened up there. If you click on that, you'll get a chance to let us know what persona your team was operating as pre-COVID-19, and select one of those. And then you'll see in the shared window, the shared screen there, exactly what people are thinking. Self-directed team coming up quite strongly pre-COVID.
Excellent. And what we're going to be doing next, as you've done this, we're going to ask you what it looks like after, now that you're working from home, and we'll see whether or not there's been a change.
So we'll switch across now. So this is going to be the same question, and that pink rectangle will appear for you again. Click on the pink rectangle on the right-hand side. And so what persona is your team operating as now in a work from home context? It's great the community of practice is building there. That's good. So this is in the current working from home context. What do you feel your team is operating as? Cai, what are your thoughts around that feedback?
Now, I momentarily forgot what it looked like exactly when we asked it before. But the good thing about Klaxoon is that I guess we can soon compare them as when you complete the activity. But I think actually what it seems like, it looks very, very similar from what I can see, which is kind of amazing, isn't it? Because we've been able to maintain the dynamics we had when we were together face to face. We've actually been able to, what it looks like the percentages are absolutely exactly the same now. So we've been able to maintain, through the use of technology, we've been able to maintain the same kind of team dynamics, but we're now all working online as opposed to where we were maybe more predominantly working face together before. I think that means that there's phenomenal opportunities for us to continue this kind of flexible working, because it doesn't look like that the dynamics of the team have dramatically changed before and after COVID-19.
Getting a little bit of deviation there, Cai. So in the first one, the self-directed team was more dominant, and now we're getting more of a community of practice, which I think is super, because that's what I would expect in a sort of more holocratic, sort of sociocratic operation where people have more autonomy to work, but are also connecting online.
Look, I was comparing two different, sorry, I can see now, I didn't see the the purple result. I can now see that they're very different. I must have looked at something different on my screen because I had two things that looked identical. But you're right, they are quite differences, like the community of practice have increased a lot, and the forum as well, which would suggest that there are actually more people now that are watching, that are more passive, that are looking at it rather than directly contributing.
We've had a question come up there. So do you look at interactions or members versus owner role in the tool?
No, just it doesn't matter who is the owner. It's just like who's active, who's actually interacting with someone else in the channels in a team. All right, I'll hand back to you, Luke.
Fantastic. So we'll go back to the presentation. And I'll hand over to you, Emily.
Yes, I know we've gone a little bit over time already, but I just wanted to quickly chat through one of the best case study, best practice examples that we identified as a part of our benchmarking report. So what you're seeing on the screen now, so this is an example from Real Foundations, who are a professional real estate services company, and they are based in the US, but their team is actually quite global. So you'll see a lovely lady up on the screen, and her name is Naomi Souza, and she is the director of presence and assets for Real Foundations. And most of her team are actually based in Chennai in India, and that's just a photo there of some of the faces of the people that Naomi works with typically on a day-to-day basis. Now, what we think is quite interesting is the way that Naomi's team is using Teams. And one of the examples that we're able to find is this hashtag, what I'm doing in a day. So every single day they're working on Teams, and they start each day just with a short post to give an update on what projects they're working on, any tasks that are pending, and they all sort of jump in and share and interact all together. And this is a really great example of kind of open, transparent conversation. So when Naomi is logging off in the US, she can share any of her pending tasks, and then her team in India can then jump in and pick up on anything that maybe still needs to be done. So if we're looking at this in terms of some of the personas, the team personas that we just looked at, we found through the benchmarking that this was an example of a self-directed team. And if we just want to switch to the next slide. And this is exactly what Naomi would have been seeing in her SWOOP dashboard. So if we're looking at some of those characteristics of a very highly productive, agile, efficient team, we can see that obviously the team persona has been identified as a self-directed team. There's a very low key player dependency, which means that they're not relying on just one key leader or a few key people to keep the conversation going. We can look at things like the core. So the core is 100%. So everyone seems to be interacting with each other. Of course, the two-way relationships, they're also at quite a high level. So that's the reciprocated conversation. There's back and forth going on. It's not just broadcasting to one or to many people. And of course, there's a very low amount of inactive people. So it seems like they've really thought about the team membership here. So there are very few people who don't have a purpose and don't have a role to play in this team. And of course, the response rate there on the right-hand side, you can see that very close to all of the posts are receiving some sort of interaction, whether that's in the form of a reply or a like. And there's very few posts that aren't receiving anything. And also you can see, I guess, how quickly they're jumping into these conversations as well. So most of the responses are coming through within the hour, if not within that 24-hour period, which you would probably expect from a team that's working in different time zones. And the way this sort of links all back into balancing tools like Yammer and Teams, if we just click to the next slide, please, Luke. We also were able to get some really great insights from Naomi as well on the way that they balance it. And they also have quite an active Yammer network as well. So Naomi says that they go to Teams for work, and Teams is where they're doing their day-to-day work with a defined group of people. But when they go to Yammer, it's where they do have more of those broader conversations where you might ask questions, find answers, share knowledge and experiences. So this is a really nice quote from Naomi that I just want to call out. So Yammer is the virtual water cooler that you go to when you're not quite sure who might benefit from the interaction or who might have the answer you're looking for. Where, of course, those interactions that are happening on Teams, they're a lot more specific to the individuals that you have nominated to be a part of that team. That's everything for that slide there. No
We're
worries.
going to jump into the last activity that we have lined up for you today, which is going to be using an electronic whiteboard that we're going to be putting e-post-it notes up onto. So we'd like to know what your takeaway tips were that you got from the session today. So what you can take back to the office. And if you click on the blue participate button that came up there, and then click on the next blue button. Now you can write more than one word on here. We'd like to know what it is that you felt you can take away with you. So what tips can you take away from today's session to drive increased collaboration in Microsoft Teams? Write your post-it note, and then obviously remember to click on the green little paper airplane there, which sends it on its way up onto the screen, onto the shared screen here. We've some excellent topics coming up here. So an organic approach, I love that. Yammer is the water cooler. So is the water cooler, and we can't forget that. That's where the serendipity happens inside the organization. That's no longer happening because we're not meeting face to face. So keep the size of the team small. That was a great comment and feedback that you gave us, tip that you gave us there, Emily, as well, about what the ideal size is. Post regularly to keep the conversation going. This is awesome feedback here. Some lovely takeaways. Wow, there's some great stuff coming up here. If anybody wants to comment on that, feel free to. I'm just spreading them out around the screen here. Innovation, I like that. I like the fact someone's actually done a drawing as well. That's what we want to see more of. Creativity. Nice. Okay. I know we're reaching the end of the session. So what we might do is just go to our final slide. Wow, some great stuff coming up here. Thank you so much. Klaxoon is a cool tool. I wonder who put that, but you know, I'd also explore the fact that we've used a different electronic tool to do some of this work on, and some of you are probably seeing an electronic whiteboard for the first time here and using. You want Klaxoon, you can have Klaxoon. It's pretty easy to get hold of. Amazing. Okay. So we'll thank you for all that feedback. That will now go into the whiteboard. You'll see the activity is finished, and we'll go back to the slides now. And just moving on to the last slide, because I think it's paramount that we understand that everybody's grappling with trust right now during this situation where people are working from home. Certain people have less trust. Some people are building trust. There's trustworthiness aspects around getting work done and whether it's being done or not, and how to get it done, and how often to collaborate, how often to communicate, what the cadence of that is, and those kinds of conversations. Please continue to have those. So trust is the biggest factor managers will have to deal with now, and placing trust first is so important. Try and set objectives and try and set work where you don't have to be checking up on your team continuously and more checking in with them, because people don't want to feel like they're being micromanaged, particularly at this time where there's some frustration and certain people are starting to feel that the isolation is getting them down. It's so important we keep each other going and that we show kindness and compassion to each other. I'm going to move to our very last slide, which is basically just something that from OnePoint's perspective, what we'd like to do is to offer you the opportunity to reach out to myself. My details are there. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or use those details there, because we're going to be offering more of these webinars, but particularly to your teams and tailored to your team for free. So reach out to us if you'd like us to run another 40-minute session. It would have different content in it to the type of session we've run right now. It's more aligned with holding better meetings online, more aligned with how to work effectively inside of your home, and how to show that kindness to each other, and how to get work done. And how to better manage and set objectives for an online working environment. So please do reach out to us for more free sessions. We'd love to hear from you, and I'll just hand over to Emily.
Yes, of course. And then on the SWOOP side of things, if anyone is interested in collaboration analytics for, it could be Microsoft Teams, it could be Yammer, it could also be Workplace by Facebook. If anyone's interested, we are happy to set up a 2-week free trial so you can see the sorts of insights that are available.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much. Thanks, SWOOP. Thanks, Cai and Emily. Thank you, Alice, for being in the background there to